Hello and welcome back to this series of videos that aim to help you plan a TGeo challenge. Now, I'm not going to be looking at maps in this video. I'm going to be looking at some of the internet resources that are available to help you plan and to help you organize your trip once you've sorted out your route. The first place to start is the TGeo message board. Now, you probably discovered this already, but if you haven't, it's a very useful resource, and I put the URL in the show notes and on my blog post that accompanies this. The TGeo message board has been going now for quite a long time, so it represents a really very, very rich source of information about all aspects of route planning. However, like all online communities, it can be a bit robust from time to time, and you can find people who take exception to what you say. Now, the challenge organisers and moderators clamp down pretty quickly on this kind of thing. But the thing that really seems to annoy people are people who post things without really thinking too much. So, for example, if I come on the message board and say, hey folks, I've just managed to get a place on the TGeo challenge, and I think I'm going to start from Dorney. Can somebody give me a good route from Dorney to the coast? You're likely to get a bad reaction. And the reason for that is that a big part of the challenge is not only walking, it's the planning of the event itself. And in many ways, that's a bigger challenge than the walking of it. Where the message board really works is if you have a specific inquiry. So let's say you want to know about a particular glen, where might be a good place to camp. If you ask that, a lot of people will share information with you and say, look, I was there a few years ago, I found a nice camp spot here, or, I camped at this point, but actually a mile further down the glen there was a much better spot. That kind of information people will share. Or they will say to you, well, actually, you won't find anywhere really comfortable to camp until you've gone past this point on the map. Very, very practical stuff. Or if you want to know what time the post office opens at Drumnadrochit, for example, or whether there's a chemist in Aviemore or Braemar, that kind of information people are very happy to share. The other thing about the challenge notice board is that you can use it like a database. So, for example, let's suppose I'm thinking about starting my challenge from Oban, rather gorgeous fishing village on the west coast, and I put Oban into Oban into the search engine here. I'm going to find a whole load of links. In fact, look at the bottom there, there's loads of them. Now, some of them are challenge journals, are Oban to Arbroath, Oban to Montrose, and those can be really useful. We'll come back and look at those again in a moment. If I just jump on a little bit further down the list at random, here we've got, for example, Oban starters accommodation. There's a number of challenges there sharing some information about good places to start. Some of them are route vetters. There's John Donahue there, who's a route vetter. So all of this information can be really, really useful. Or if we want to, for example, find out something about Ballater, which is one of the villages that you walk through as we leave the Cairngorms, leave the high mountains. There we go. Where to go after Braemar. That's a very new one. There's one of my posts there. Some more challenge journals, help for the Ballater campsite, and so on and so forth. So before you make an inquiry, you might want to just use the search engine to see what comes up. So the challenge notice board is a really useful resource, but please use it thoughtfully. Don't ask silly questions, or if you do, be prepared for people to metaphorically thump you back. So that's the TGeo message board. Now, I did mention in there challenge journals, and increasingly over the years, challengers write up their journey when they get home. I do that. I find it's a way of preserving the experience for another week or so. And they often tell you a bit about the route they move through. They share photographs and so on and so forth, which is a useful tool, really, in preparation. So here's a website that's run by one of the challengers, Phil Lambert. And one of the things Phil does at his DoodleCat website is he brings together links for TGeo Challenge diaries. Now, I'm not sure he's doing this anymore, but these kind of links are really, really useful. So I'll put the DoodleCat link in the show notes. Go and have a look at it. But just remember, most people tend to notify the rest of us that they put their journal up by using the challenge message board. So you can either do a search as we did before, or if you go and start looking at the posts that were made around about June, July, the year before, you can see most of last year's diaries. Here's a couple to look at. This is Jean Turner's diary from 2011, and she started from Ardrishaig, the most southerly starting point. Jean's diaries are always really interesting because she plans TGO challenges often with a theme. So the theme of this particular walk was ancient history, and she visits, she's planned her route to look at a number of really ancient prehistoric sites, ancient churches and that kind of thing. I really like reading Jean's challenge diaries. Here's another one. This is a lovely guy called Ian Cottrell, and Ian is a very, very keen photographer. So Ian's challenges diaries tend to be photographic based. But that's great because you can see what the terrain looks like and so on. So here's one. So if you just press play here, see what happens. And there you go, Ian's TGO Challenge 2017. And he's put up little notices here which tell you which day they are. And these diaries can be really helpful as well. You do get a feel for the terrain, the variety of it, and particularly you see what that particular route looks like. So there's a whole number of challenge diaries, lots and lots of different style there. Some may be text-based, some may be photographs, and some that have bits of video in them as well. Another resource for planning, which I know a lot of people use, are the TGO Challenge podcast series that Bob Cartwright has produced at the Outdoor Station. If you haven't found the Outdoor Station yet, again, I'll put the link in the show notes. Do have a look at it. Now, some years ago, Bob and I produced a series of podcasts as we walked from west to east. And we took different routes. And Bob has produced them almost as radio programs, so they intercut a little bit. Now, one of the nice things about Highlands, it doesn't change very much. And I'm still amazed to find people, when I'm walking the challenge, who I've not only listened to the podcasts about that particular route, but they've got them with them and they're listening to them at night. So, you know, they're listening to the entries for the next couple of days. Because it gives them a clue as to how hard the stage is, what kind of walking it is and so on. So I know, I haven't listened to them for a long time, I have to confess, but I know that a lot of people really do value these. So that's another little resource for you. And some of Bob's posts are videos as well, or combination of video and photograph. The next thing that we can use the TGO, we can look to the internet to help us with TGO planning, are really details of places. So here, for example, is the website for the Glenmore campsite in Aviemore, which is really, really quite helpful. Not only tells you about the campsite, but it tells you about things that are going on around there. Tells you how much it costs. This is a pricey campsite, really, but it's a gorgeous location. And one of the things that is worth doing this for everywhere you're going is that increasingly campsites like us to book ahead. There's some very practical reasons for that. Over the last few years, some of the campsites have changed hands, and previous owners haven't told the new owners about the TGeo challenge. So they're sitting there in the middle of May, very quiet, and suddenly, 50 people suddenly turn up with tents and stuff, and it's a bit of a shock for them. So it's always a good idea to book ahead with your campsite. The other things that you'll find, if we look at a search here, is that many towns and villages that go through will have their own website. So let's put up Newton Moor, which is a nice village just on the approach to the Cairngorms. So there's a number of sites here, cottages and venues. There's a Wikipedia enter, tells you a bit about the history. But this looks like the visitor's guide. Here it comes. A bit about Newton Moor, and they will all have two things that are really useful. One is list of places to stay. So here you've got B&B, guest houses, caravan camping, hostels, hotels, and so on. And most importantly, shops and services. Particularly in the west, in the northwest, the settlements are very small, and the shops few and far between. So if you're thinking about planning resupply or planning to send some packages of food drops off, and you want to know if the post office is still open, this is the way to do it. And please do this, because these shops do disappear. There used to be a lovely little place in a village called Lagan, which you go through if you cut over the Corriaric Pass from Fort Augustus. And Lagan stores used to be really a very famous kind of place, really, because it sold a bit of everything. So it was a very useful challenge facility. But it closed a few years ago. Now, it may have reopened up again now, I don't know. But don't take that for granted. These community websites give you access not only to information about the village, but lots of information about where to stay, campsites, B&Bs, hostels, and so on. And most importantly, the shops and services that you can find there too. And finally, I'll mention Travel Line Scotland, which is particularly useful for those of you that don't know the UK. This is a website that connects together both train journeys and bus journeys in Scotland, and is really quite helpful for getting to your starting point. We talked a bit about this in the first video, but let's just put something into the journey planner and see what happens. So, no, don't need that. So I want to go from Inverness, and I want to go to Torridon. I want to leave after, I don't know what, 10, I suppose. Oops. Just get rid of that rubbish. I want to leave after 10. And I want to do it on, I can only go up to February. So that's worth thinking about. But let's just put a date in to start with. So I don't know, we're going to be doing it on a Thursday probably. So let's put Thursday the 15th in, or the 1st. Here we go, it's planning the journey for us. And there we go. It's a combination of bus, walking and coach. So we can have a little look at that. And there we go. And there's one bus that leaves Strathcowan rail station, which is quite useful. Now, we did notice there that when we put that into the search engine, we couldn't search any further than February. And I'll just make this point, is that timetables change and bus services change. A few years ago, I wanted to start the challenge at Howell, which is a little village just south of Meleg and Lochayat. And there was a bus that left Fort Augustus and made its way up to Howell. And I checked on the timetables, fine, that's what we were going to do. Arranged the trip to Fort William in order to link onto this bus service. And for some reason, a couple of days before we left, I just decided to check, and that bus had vanished. So I hunted round a little bit and found a company, I think called Shield Buses or Transport, phoned them up, and they ran a taxi service. And they told me that the bus service had been cancelled because I think the subsidy had gone on it. But they were able to book me a taxi. So the taxi met me at Lochayat station and drove us all the way to our start. And ever since then, I've always just checked those details just a couple of days before we go, because although that bus was on the timetable, perhaps in February or March when I planned it, the bus service had been deleted by the time I wanted to use it. So Travel Line Scotland is really useful as well. And of course, in the broadest sense, Google can be really helpful in looking up lots of detail. So as you plan, use the notice board, listen to the podcasts, read the challenge journals, and then as you begin to hone your planning down, and you think you've got a route, personally, as part of your planning, I would go through and look at the community websites for all of these villages and places and glens that you're running through. Gives you a good idea of the services that are available to you, or, if you're picking a ferry crossing, what time the ferry starts and what time it finishes, and so on and so forth. So there you go. The internet is a good tool. There's some great resources available now, and many challengers have really put a lot of time and effort into producing their challenge journals, and they're a really good place to start. Not only to plan your route, but to get a feel for how the challenge is as you move across Scotland from west to east.